Raising the Banner, episode number 8 already, Garrett Kaloje. How the heck are you here on this beautiful Sunday evening?
Boy, I have not had a chance to even catch my own breath up until a couple hours ago. Boy, it's been a long week in the hockey world. It's been very fun. But as always, I'm glad to be back on here with you, Don. And, just talking a little bit of hockey, re-clearing kind of some of our focus, where we're going. And it's rejuvenating, if you will.
It is, and like you said, this week has had its share of interesting events, I guess, from an NHL standpoint. We had the Global Series, by the way, the last 2 days over in Finland. And what city was that in again?
Tampere, Tampere.
Okay, so that's north of Helsinki, and that happens to be the hometown of Alexander Barkov, by the way, who was with the Florida Panthers, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And I wanted to kind of talk about maybe an idea for the Global Series. And I like the Global Series, and we talked about this a couple episodes back about the Global Series, and you and I both kind of agreed that it's an idea that probably should continue to go. And we'll get into that in a minute. But the Global Series in Finland this weekend and it was just between the Dallas Stars and the Florida Panthers, and both one of the games won by Florida, so they pick up 4 important points on the road, if you will. Also this week, the Detroit Red Wings traded defenseman Olli Maatta to the Utah Hockey Club for a third-rounder in 2025. So that frees up $3 million of cap space for the Detroit Red Wings, which is interesting. I don't know if that was so much a cap move or just Maatta was the odd man out. Maybe both. I'm not sure.
Maybe both. He was playing his way towards playing himself out of the lineup, so get some sort of pick and cap relief back, which this team sorely needs. Yeah, I think that's. I think it's just it's an inevitability of the league, is what I'll say.
Yeah, no, and I think you're spot on, and I think that's probably realistically where that was going. And so, Olli Maatta's gone, and we were wondering that during the off season. I think you and I kind of talked about that, mainly of why Maatta was still on the team. And Justin Hall apparently played his way on the team, and to your point, Maatta played his way out. So those were the two kind of perhaps bubble guys that we talked about. So, salary cap move for the Wings. And since we're doing an NHL update, Garrett, I wanted to talk about the New York Islanders real quick. The Islanders, and I know no one's really going to have any sympathy, and I'm not looking for that, but the Islanders have lost Matthew Barzal for 4 to 6 weeks. He's on long-term IR, so he's LTIR, so he's going to come off the cap space anyway. Then you have Adam Pelech, who is out 4 to 6 weeks, also on IR for the Islanders. And then they have Mike Riley and Alex Romanov that are day-to-day. So listening to Patrick Waugh yesterday, it sounded as if maybe the Islanders might be making a move here to bring somebody in. Not sure exactly who it would be, who they would pick up, but it sounded like they needed to get some help there relatively quickly. Otherwise, because they've lost, I believe, they beat Buffalo on Saturday in a 4-3 win, but that's a team that's lost 5 out of 6. So you got to wonder, you don't want to get too far down the road here if you're the Islanders, especially if you got guys out 4 to 6 weeks, 2 of your top players.
Someone had also mentioned, I think it was Friedman had mentioned, and I was listening to NHL Network Radio earlier in the week, but mentioned how sometimes Patrick Waugh, when he gets into these situations, can just fully, explode right back when he did the same days when he was, with Montreal and then obviously with Colorado. And some people wonder that if he continues to face adversity, if he's even going to walk out the door, right? If this slide continues for the Islanders.
Yeah, it's also an interesting point because remember he was the head coach of one of the Quebec Major Junior teams, and that's exactly what happened. He lost his cool down. Now, of course, being in junior is a little bit different because you have younger kids, obviously, right? They're 18 to 20 years old, and you can't blow up on them like that. So, and that was kind of his issue. But like you said, in Colorado, he had the same issue. I mean, knocking over the glass in the penalty box, and that kind of stuff. So to your point, you're probably right. What's going to happen with New York? I'm curious to know. That's one of those teams that we talked about earlier in the season that was a playoff kind of bubble team, right? They're one of those teams that our Red Wings were kind of striving towards. And so maybe these injuries put the Islanders behind the eight ball a bit. And I think with the Islanders, they got that third spot last year in the Metropolitan. They had a great late March and April. Mm-hmm. And then all they got rewarded was to be able to play the Carolina Hurricanes in the first round. But the bottom line is they got that third spot in the Metro, and they pushed the Flyers out. Well, the Flyers didn't really do themselves any help. But anyway, that's an Islanders team that, Garrett, I would assume that the expectation would be to get back in the playoffs, right? And if not, challenge for the Metropolitan. So I got to think this could be a desperation time for the New York Islanders. So curious to see what happens with them down, here in the next couple of weeks.
Yep, and we're getting to that time of year where teams are playing themselves on or off of the playoff line, and we'll discuss that obviously when it gets closer. So It's hard to believe that we're, roughly 3 weeks away from our Thanksgiving. If we have any listeners north of the border, it's just a typical Thursday for them.
Yeah, no turkey and no stuffing for you guys up there in Canada. But, that's kind of that cutting, well, that's kind of the first measuring stick point for the NHL at that point. But, Garrett, we talked about real quick off the top here about the Global Series in Finland, and the town in which the series was held in is Alexander Barkov's hometown, and he happens to play for the Florida Panthers. And Barkov seemed to like the home cooking, apparently, with 1 goal and 4 assists in 2 games. So 5 points in 2 games for Barkov. And you got to remember, he just came back to the lineup 2 weeks ago.
He had also, for perspective, he had also had those. Florida had won the first game on the first. They had won 6-4. He had 4 points in that one. He had scored the goal and 3 assists and put up an assist the game on the second, which they ended up also winning by a 2-goal margin, 4-2. So they, each team basically lost a home game against one another, but nonetheless, they still he put up a point. 4 of those 5 though were in the first game on the first.
Yeah. So if you live in Florida and a big Panthers fan, you will not be able to see the Dallas Stars this year. And if you live in Dallas and are a Florida Panthers fan, you will not be able to see your Panthers play in Dallas this year. But interestingly enough, Garrett, speaking of this global series, I had an epiphany this weekend. Okay. And I was trying to think of a way, how could we make this global series better? Like, it's good. I think it's fun. But how can we make it better? You can always make stuff better, right? I mean, like the Big Mac. You have the Big Mac now that has the hamburger patties, and now you have the Big Mac that has the chicken patties in it. I mean, it's fantastic right now, right? If you haven't tried the new Big Mac, this is not a plug for McDonald's, but if you haven't tried it with the chicken Big Mac, phenomenal. But anyway, they made it better. How can we make the global series better here? And so I was thinking, why don't we rewind this global series? We could still have the Sweden trip. We could still have the Finland trip. They could still go to Prague. And you could still go to München in Germany, or wherever you want to go in Germany for that matter, right?
Right.
Why don't we take 4 teams in each area, so Sweden, Finland, Czech Republic, Germany, take 4 teams and move their entire training camp to those areas. So Sweden gets 4 teams, Finland gets 4 teams, Czech Republic gets 4 teams, Germany gets 4 teams. And then those teams play out their preseason games against one another in those regions. So the 4 teams in Germany would play each other round-robin style for their preseason games. And then you could have a prospects tournament in between those 4 teams. And so from start to finish, from the time you break camp until the time you're ready to come back across the pond for opening night, you have your training camp in either one of those countries. And then that's 16 teams, right? 4 times 4, 16. So that's half the league. The other half of the league just does the traditional training camps. And then the next year, you rotate. So the teams that didn't go the year before would go the next year, and you just rotate it. I think that would create a better exhibition for the fans abroad, so they could see it start to finish, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you also create, you kind of put a spotlight on training camp, which doesn't really get it that much unless it's locally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of think that would be kind of fun. I think that would be interesting because the teams could just kind of post up there. You don't have to worry about waiting a week between games now. Because like Dallas and Florida now basically won't play until the middle of next week because they got to come back across the pond and get set back up again. And,
Mm-hmm.
you saw what it did to Jersey and Buffalo. Jersey seemed to be okay with it. Buffalo seemed to like stagger out of the gate a little bit from coming back from Sweden. So I'm curious. What do you think? I mean, do you like my idea? Do you think it'd be good to have the training camp over there like that from start to finish?
So I think it would actually be a solid idea. I actually think it would be a fun, solid idea. In how you would execute it, I think you could execute something roughly to that expectation. I think another thing that it benefits from too is I think then teams could benefit from having their players who are already overseas to start the season,
Right.
at least give them a look, right?
Sure.
A little harder to suggest that, if you will, because the seasons for like the Swedish Elite League have already started, the Finnish League has already started, so obviously you're trying to borrow them for 4 to whatever games might be a little tricky, but I think for the most part you could verify that. I think if you could find a way to get those prospects in there, right, and see where, for example, if the Wings, let's say, were set up in Stockholm or they were set up in Skellefteå, and it was one of those things where it was them, let's just say them, Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. Let's just pick 4 teams in the division.
I like it.
And knowing that, each team might have some prospects that are in Sweden already playing over there, especially top prospects already, I think it's a very smart idea. Because, one, it does 2 things, I think, for the league. It lets you see these top prospects play in their jersey, in their home country, which is huge. And I think it helps with their development to help get them reps with other teammates on the professional level as well. I think that could work. I still think that you wouldn't have to do it every other year, though. I think you could probably do all 32 teams over there. Logistically, it could be a little bit of an issue, but it depends on how the league would want to set it up. I think it could be something fun, though. And in fact, I think that could be something that could do it. And with the league already talking about trying to reduce the amount of games or preseason games anyways, stuff like this becomes more and more of a possibility.
Well, right. And you kind of stole a little thunder there because we talked about that, and that was something you and I were kind of pushing off for a little bit about later in the year about the preseason games being reduced from 8 to maybe 6. Remember, this teams used to play 12. It wasn't that long ago that teams used to play 12 preseason games. Now it's down to 8, sometimes 9. And you got to wonder, to your point, if we're gonna drop those to 6, you could do that by my suggestion. So just something I seriously, I was just kind of sitting down. I was thinking, how could we do this to where it gets more publicity, but you can spread it out basically over three to 4 weeks, and you could just set up shop over there in that whatever country you're in, and that's training camp. I mean, that's what it's all about. The prospects tournaments that we used to have seem to be kind of fizzling a little bit due to funding, and it's a little bit more expensive, right? The Red Wings used to host 5 or 6 teams in Traverse City. This year they had 2.
I think I remember when it was an 18 tournament.
It was an 18 tournament. It was back in the day. But it's much, much harder now with travel, putting the teams up in a hotel and that kind of stuff for a week. It's very difficult to do that. And so this could alleviate that. You bring the whole shebang over there and wherever it might be. So the Red Wings, like you said, set up in Stockholm or Skellefteå or whatever, which I think Skellefteå would be awesome because that's way north of Stockholm. Like we're talking, I've never been. I think someone told me it's 4 hours north of Stockholm. I don't know. Something like that. But it's quite a bit north. Anyway, so that'd be cool. The Red Wings could set up there, and that would be their training camp spot. I think that would be fantastic. And I'm assuming that they would do Sweden.
Well, especially now with the era of decreased decreased prospect tournaments, and I think
Right,
they're trying
right.
to simplify travel and things. This could be a fun way to engage the European side of the fan base. And also, too, like I said, I think it'd be a real fun look to just from a development perspective as
Yeah.
well, too. See these young players that are over there that have already started their seasons overseas. I think it would be a good way to kind of integrate them with the professional clubs that they at least have their rights to.
Well, and on these road trips, you kind of start to gather some camaraderie, right? And now, granted, and we'll just pick the Red Wings for example. Most of the time, the guys that are called up, that are invited to camp, are ones that are probably either going to play in Grand Rapids or at the very least Toledo, right? Mm-hmm. So if you could get the guys together for 3 to 4 weeks, it makes those call-ups and those adjustments a lot easier later in the season, in my personal opinion. I don't think the current way this is done, that a lot of the younger prospects get the love, if you will, of playing with the big roster. And I think this will kind of, I don't want to say it's going to even the playing field, but when you have to make the call-ups during the season, where you have to move, Geilander from Toledo to Grand Rapids, or you have to move, Casper from Grand Rapids to Detroit. It makes that the teams have already played together. They have a kind of a gel that I think would be interesting. So I'm just wondering if that would do anything. I also wonder, what do you think the NHLPA would say about that? Do you think they would be on board with something like that?
Well, I mean, I would think that you would have to adjust some training camp schedules
Sure.
earlier. I think if there were modifications to maybe the schedule, like when you started over here in America,
right.
Things like that, I'm sure that there could be some modifications made. It would really depend on what the PA would say. And I think a lot of players would prefer to start the season out over here. But again, I mean, it could just be regionalized for sure. I mean, if you're a European-born player, might be, it would be interesting to see what that was like in discussions.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. So it's interesting. I'm just a spitball idea, but I think it would be an interesting one, and I would be curious to see how it would play out. I would really like to see how that would play out. I think it would be fun, and also, as you and I are both really big hockey fans, I think this season specifically, I studied more of the training camp, and I watched a lot more of the preseason games than I typically did. But I think at that point, I think it gives the fans something more to look at. And of course, if you want to travel to watch your team play in the preseason, I mean, guys, that's an opportunity. So it's interesting. It's just an idea I thought of. So I would love to see it. I think it'd be a good idea, but we probably never will. But anyway, just something to add to the global series. Because here's the thing, and the reason I got to thinking about it is what I don't like currently is the fact that we did Sweden right off the rip, right? And then we have Finland now, and you've basically taken 4 squads, right? So you've taken the New Jersey Devils and the Buffalo Sabres, and now the Dallas Stars and the Florida Panthers, and I know we're only 4 weeks into the season, but you kind of shuffled up their season, and maybe starting the season over there might be easier, but having like a team like Florida and Dallas, and you got to remember, Florida played late into the, and so did Dallas for that matter, played late into May and June last year. I don't know if that's the right move right now. That's the thing. I don't know, and so that's my thinking. It's like, do we do something different there to put it at the beginning of the season and get it the hell out of the way? We did the global series and that kind of stuff. I wonder about how their seasons look before, during, and after these trips. And we saw it last year with the Red Wings, right? Struggled out of the gate, went to Sweden, kind of got together, if you will, made the trade for Kaner when they got back, and then we took off. Whereas Toronto, they took off when they got back. Ottawa, I think, took a step back a little bit. And so did Minnesota. So I'm curious to see. I don't think Dallas and Florida are going to fade out of anything for that matter. But you look at the Sabres this year, they've struggled out of the gate. New Jersey's took off out of the gate, right? New Jersey just happened to win both games over there. So I'm thinking, why not put the training camp over there and just be done with it? Then the global series is out of the way. You can focus on the regular season when you get back home, and you're good to go. And from that standpoint, I would just be curious to see what they do. But anyway, and again, it kind of ties it back to be like the McDonald's took the Big Mac, which is that's Americana, right? I mean, nothing's
Of course.
right. Okay, so you have the 3 buns, the 2 patties, the onions, right? The Thousand Island dressing, the cheese, and now they took that and added chicken to it. Phenomenal! What a brilliant idea! You took something that was already great and made it greater. Make the Big Mac great again. That's exactly what they did. It's amazing. So I love it. So interesting stuff. Now this week with our Red Wings, rough one, tough schedule. I thought. Dropped a 3-2 overtime decision to the Edmonton Oilers on Sunday. And Garrett, you can make the discussion if the penalty against Detroit should have been called with a $1.57 or $1.47 or whatever it was in the second or the third period. Should have been called. That gave that led to Edmonton having the power play in the overtime. I don't know. Probably could have let the call slide. Nonetheless, Edmonton gets it. They end up winning it in overtime.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
I thought they played for what it was. I thought they played marginally well enough to still get the point, get the second point. I mean, it's not ideal to be on a slide, still play the way you were. But again, that's just one of those things where I guess moving forward, that's just the way it is. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I didn't like the call, but it is what it is. I'm not gonna piss and moan like I would a playoff game right now about a call in the third period. Just It is what it is. And not to mention the Wings were kind of playing on their heels just before that, so to me it was like, you were kind of trying to fade out, but whatever. And then on Wednesday they hosted the Winnipeg Jets. Now, granted, that was Mickey Redmond bobblehead night, which was pretty cool, I guess. And
I still need to hit my contact and see if they have the goods.
That's right. I should have a. I may
owe Don a holy jumping.
If you can't get that, can you at least make sure that you can get me a gravy Zamboni boat? That would be the tip of the iceberg if you could do that.
Yes, against Boston. That you know what, I may have to do that for content purposes for the show. I may have to do that
because those things there's only 7,500 of them, so you're gonna have to get there at like 3 hours before puck drop, probably, Garrett. You're probably gonna have to like box out in front of the door as if you were like, the last couple seconds of an NCAA tournament game. Like, you're gonna have to box out, dude, and separate yourself to make sure you get that.
For sure.
To make sure you get that gravy boat, because that looks pretty damn cool.
No, it does. It looks pretty. It looks pretty mild, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah. So, anyway, that night the Red Wings hosted the Winnipeg Jets, and boy, did the Winnipeg Jets come out hot. 3 goals on about 4 or 5 shots early on in that game put the Red Wings back and pretty much put that game out of reach. This Winnipeg team, Garrett, is flying right now. They're now 11-1-1. They beat the Tampa Bay Lightning today 7-4 in Winnipeg in a matinee. And
I mean, they're all their lines are clicking, and it's just like everyone's scoring on reckless abandon. I don't know what it is, Don. Everybody's just popping off.
Hellebuck's playing hella good, if you will. I mean, I don't know what to tell you guys on that one. It's 11-1-1. It's probably one of the hottest starts I can remember out of the gate. You just got to wonder, are they peaking too early?
And how can you sustain it, right?
Yeah,
sure, you can start out playing 12 games,
their power play.
But really, your big thing is you just have to know how to sustain it, right?
Yeah.
I use the old adage of, Sparky Anderson back in the day in baseball, right? He had said, don't come back to me and talk to me about my team until we've played 40 games in, right? And they have a 162-game season. Well, I mean, if you want to equate that to hockey, well, don't talk about where the Jets are going to be at till like 20, 30 games into the season, right?
Right.
They could start out hot as a firecracker and then just play 500 hockey the rest of the season and barely break into the playoffs.
Right. Absolutely. And then, if you with Winnipeg, their power play alone is 44% on the season, dude. They're almost clicking at 50%. Like, you cannot put them on the man advantage. You can't do it. 40. I mean, of course. Now, granted, I understand. 44% is not sustainable. It's not going to be what it is every week, but still, in 12 games, you're clicking at 44% on your power play. That is absolutely insane. To the point that I ended up picking up Niederreiter, by the way, on my fantasy team, just because he's been part of that trajectory there in Winnipeg. I can't believe how good that Jets team has been, and you saw it firsthand against the Wings the other night. I mean, it was a clinic, and then they just, I mean, the Wings kind of fought a little bit back, right? They got back within 3-2, but then Winnipeg just shut the door and added 3 more goals in that third period, one of which was a horrible play by Jeff Petrie. But still, Winnipeg just put it down. I mean, they just put the Wings thought they had a little bit of life back into it. It was just like that. It was gone. It was over. And so that's the Winnipeg team. And again today, down 2-0 to Tampa Bay at home, which you kind of expected from a team that's coming back from a road trip. And from there, they outscored Tampa Bay 7-2 after that. So, and that's it, dude. That's not Tampa Bay is not bad this year. Like, Tampa's a decent squad. So for them to do that is absolutely incredible. And speaking of that division, which would be the Atlantic, you have the Florida Panthers, who have 19 points. They're 9-3-1, right? Mm-hmm. Tampa Bay is 7-5-0. They have 14 points. Then you have Toronto, Ottawa, Detroit, Boston, Buffalo, Montreal, all within 4 points of one another. That's what the Atlantic is right now. So you can complain about the Red Wings being 5-5-1 through 11, but they're 1 point behind Ottawa, who's 6-5, 2 points behind Toronto, who's 6-5-1, tied with Boston at the identical record of 5-6-1 or 5-5-1. Sorry, Boston's played one more game, which they've lost. They're winning tonight, right now against Seattle. Buffalo's 4-7-1 with 9 points, and so is Montreal 4-7-1 at 9 points. Mm-hmm. So the Atlantic, which was typically last year, you remember, the Red Wings kind of got off to a slower start, and it was between Florida and Boston at that point. Nobody else was even close to them all season long. So you got to wonder, maybe Florida's kind of distancing themselves just a tick. But we'll see what they do when they come back from Finland. Does Toronto catch them? Does Tampa catch them? It's interesting. That Atlantic division, from top to bottom, probably looks like the best division in hockey for that matter right now. Maybe you could make the argument for the Pacific, but I don't think 3 teams are going to get in for the Pacific anyway. So, we talked about that earlier in the season, Garrett, about the concern about the Red Wings being in the Atlantic. I would say right now, the Wings haven't played, of the 11 games, they haven't played a complete game yet. Are you concerned with the Atlantic division? I think they're right in the thick of it right now, to be honest with you.
It doesn't seem as top heavy as we kind of thought.
Yeah.
Toronto and Florida are kind of trying to run away with it, but I think everybody else is just kind of in the messy middle is the way I call it. I don't necessarily am not panicked. I'm not worried, but I mean, again, it's not a good sign, I guess, to see that, every night that the Wings, let's say the Wings lose and then everybody else loses, right? But then if the Wings win, it seems like everybody else wins. You really can't make those gains, I guess, palpable or palatable. And again, I mean, we're still 6 weeks out even from the end of 2024. So it's not like it's even one of those things where I'm remotely worried about that.
Right.
Now, the Wings better clean it up, because I think one of the things that they benefit from now is having a majority of their home games in the first part of the season. But by no stretch do I think that the Atlantic is already been decided. I mean, I think, sure, I'm curious to see how Florida can respond well to this. But again, I mean, that team won the Stanley Cup and it's come out hot as a firecracker.
Yeah, right.
And that's more of a testament to Paul Maurice and his coaching staff than anything else. And also having, Sergei Bobrovsky just be absolutely just standing on his head.
Right. Yeah, no doubt.
So,
and I think that's what it's been. And I think you throw in the additions of Jake Gensel in Tampa. I think it's helped them a lot, especially on their power play. Kucherov, beast, right? He's up there as one of the top point getters in the league right now. No shock to anybody else there. So, to your point, I think it's there. I think that's exactly right. So, yeah, that's kind of the roundup of the NHL this week. We'll dive more into the NHL as we kind of get going. It's still early in the season. There's not a lot of stuff that we can really pull from that, and unless we want to start taking hot takes, which I don't think we want to do on this pod. I don't think that's kind of our MO. So, there's not enough tangibility out there for us to pull from at the NHL level right now. So, and I don't want to do hot takes, and I sure as the hell don't want to sit here and do analytical breakdowns for everybody either. So,
yeah, I mean, as much as I'd love to do it, I don't think it's smart to just, bore everybody with that.
We can use it in certain aspects, but I don't want to sit here and talk about Patrick Kane's analytics for 3 hours with everybody. It just, nobody wins with that. And,
I agree.
And there's other podcasts that do that. So you can feel free to listen to those guys, whichever one you... And Brian Fisher, who was on our show last week, is one of those guys that'll break it down. He's fantastic at it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. But, by the way, Garrett, off topic. Have you ever tried these Cayman Jack margaritas? Have you tried these?
No, I never even knew they existed.
OMG. These things, listen to this. These are premium malt beverage, right? This one just happens to be the margarita one. They have one, if you like a mojito, they have one that's a Cuban mojito.
Okay.
Oh, my God. You need some ice and a glass. And you can sit back and enjoy your evening of watching hockey, whether it be on Flow Sports, which now has the AHL games on for $30 a month, and the ECHL games on. These things are phenomenal. I would highly recommend. We should try to get these guys to sponsor us. That's a great idea. Cayman Jack. These things, my wife brought these home. They also have zero sugar ones too. So if you can't have the sugar, they have zero sugar ones too. The margarita ones are fantastic. I like the mojito one. They also have one that's a Moscow Mule. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And, us hockey fans, we have to have our adult beverages during the games. I recommend these. I'm typically a beer drinker, but these are made with real lime juice and agave nectar. Just saying. They're pretty good, and you can get them at your local grocery store or your favorite liquor store. 5.8% alcohol, Garrett. So you can have a couple of these and get a couple wobbly pops going. So you don't have to drink a lot.
Start seeing sideways if you have 3 or 4.
You certainly can. There's $2 on the ice. I don't know what's going on. So, yeah. Cayman Jack, dude. Try these out. If you can go get you a little sixer of these, try them out. I think you would like them. I do. I really do think you like. I like these things. Yeah. Great stuff. Cayman Jack. And like I said, they have a zero sugar one, too, if you don't like that. That's a huge plug for Cayman Jack. I really hope you guys are listening to our show.
We may have to email them with this section of the pod.
I might have to. Or maybe give them a follow, maybe on the old X there, and see if they reach back out to us. But going into the minor leagues, into the American Hockey League, the AHL. Now, the Grand Rapids Griffins are the Detroit Red Wings affiliate. That's a team that I typically follow, and I watch on a regular. Last year, Grand Rapids had issues with the Milwaukee Admirals. Milwaukee was by far probably one of the better teams in that division of the AHL. And really, I mean, they ended up eliminating the Grand Rapids Griffins in the second round in 5 games. It was a great series. This year, however, the Rockford Ice Hogs seem to be that team that's going to kind of pick up the pieces that the Admirals left. Not the Admirals' fault, because the Nashville Predators sold everybody off. But the Rockford Ice Hogs have speed, they have physicality like Milwaukee had last year, and they're giving Grand Rapids fits this year. Grand Rapids is 6-2-1, and those 2 regulation losses were both to Rockford at 4-1 losses. 1 in Rockford and 1 in Grand Rapids. Now, there are 2 players that are on the Rockford Ice Hogs. By the way, Rockford is the Chicago Blackhawks affiliate of the AHL. Colton Dock and Frankie Nazar are 2 of the players that play for Rockford in the Chicago system. And watching that game the other night, I don't know how either one of them are not on Chicago's lineup right now. I do not know how the Blackhawks do not have either one of these guys up and playing on their active roster at this point. What Frankie Nazar did in that first period of the first goal, by taking a puck that was turned over between 2 defensemen in the Grand Rapids Griffins, skating it up over center ice, sliding into the zone, makes one move over to the right, and a slapper top corner on Kosa blew my mind. I mean, watching Michigan hockey as much as I have, I knew Frankie Nazar has that kind of skill. But to see him do that on a professional level is a different thing. And I'm just curious to know how are those two not on Chicago's roster at this point? It baffles my mind at this point.
I think Chicago's looking at it more long term. I mean, I'm sure Frankie Nazar had a couple of distinguished years at Michigan, and then obviously drafted there. Oliver Moore is also another centerman that they have that could kick out to wing. I think he's another guy for their future. I just think for them it's all patience. I think they're trying to just do the slow build on this thing. I think they're just trying to see what they have too. I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, we all know Bedard's off to a hot start. You all know that he's off to that type of, he's going to be that game-changing type player. But really, you're just trying to see what you have, right? And you're going to just let the chips fall where they do. I think that's why Nazar's in the AHL, and you're hoping that those guys can play their way in permanently to the roster by the end of this upcoming season.
And a little bit more about Michigan hockey. The Friday night's 3 stars in the AHL, Colton Dock was the 3rd star with that game against Grand Rapids. Terrific player. And that's also I believe he's the son of Kirby Dock. Is that correct, from the Blackhawks, or nephew? I can't remember.
I think he's a nephew or a brother of Kirby Dock.
Okay, so he's the okay, there you go. That's probably right. Anton Wahlberg with the Americans. And then former goaltender from the University of Michigan, Eric Portillo, was the number 1 star for the Ontario Reign. He's in the LA Kings. He's with the LA Kings affiliate. And Portillo was a guy when he was at Michigan that was hot and cold, right? And everyone gave him a hard time about, he's got to step his game up if he's going to make it to the NHL level. Well, he's the number 1 star for the Ontario Reign. So pretty cool to see, a Michigan goaltender. And that's really the first one that I've seen in a while from a Michigan standpoint. That's kind of broken into the NHL and making a name for himself in a way. It's been a minute. So very, very cool to see. And then Joshua Roy, by the way, yesterday for Laval with a Hattie in the 3rd period with a 6-3 win there. Awesome stuff. Jacob Goucher for the Phantoms. That's a player we saw last weekend with Grand Rapids. He's a hell of a player for Philadelphia system, too. I think I would expect him to be up very, very soon for the Flyers, especially the way the Flyers have gotten off to a slow start.
And the Flyers are kind of hitting a little bit of a wall, too.
You got that right. I
assume that they're probably going to have him come up at some point.
Kid's a heck of a talent. He's a heck of a talent for the Phantoms there in Lehigh Valley. So, by the way, as I mentioned, if you want to watch the AHL games, go to Flow Sports. You can get a monthly pass. It's $30 a month. You watch the AHL games, ECHL games, all of them, every night. It's amazing. It's totally worth the money if you get it. And not to mention, there's the USHL is also on there. The USHPHL is also on there, and then they also have some of the Ontario leagues that feed into juniors are also on there. So, and I almost forgot. Most importantly, they also have the WCHA, which is the Western Collegiate Hockey Association. They have those, so that's Michigan
Correct.
Tech, Northern Michigan, that kind of thing. Those games are all on there live. And yes, even Lake Superior State with our own buddy Matt Pocket. So his games are on there if you would like to watch him.
I know he's very busy. I would love to get Matt on too. I think that would be
that's
fun.
a damn good idea. We should do that. I should reach out to him. In fact, I'm going to write that down. Reach out to Pocket.
Write that down right now, and I think it would actually be quite fun to just say, you know what?
Oh my gosh, he's a great guy. He's a friend of mine.
We could have a 2-hour podcast with him just on Lake Superior State.
And it was funny because I post, if you follow my X handle, at Donald Jr. 4013, I do post about the Toledo Walleye and the Grand Rapids Griffins during their games. So if you decide not to spend the $30, you can just follow me on X, and I'll keep you updated throughout the entire games. I do not do it for the Red Wings because there's 1,800 people that do it for the Red Wings. You don't need to follow me for that, so I won't do it for the Wings. But I do it for Toledo, and I do also for Grand Rapids. It's a lot of fun. Something to do.
Yeah, I might start, depending on what happens back half of the season here, I may try to do something a little bit more with, either Sarnia or Windsor, with Sarnia being as good as they are.
Do the spits.
Well,
do the spits.
Yep, with how good the Spits have been this year, I mean they're 11-2-1 in the OHL right now. So I mean they're I think they've got. I'm looking at it right now. It looks like they've got the second best record in all of the league. They're 11-2-1. The only team that's better than them right now is Kitchener, 12-2-1-1.
And so that's a Kitchener team. That's a Kitchener team that has been good for a couple years now. So
yes, and they've got a lot of NHL talent on that team as well too.
Yes, they do. Kitchener was an 8 seed a couple years ago and knocked Windsor out in the playoffs. And that's a team that's just gotten better. Now, typically, as you know, Garrett, don't mean to steal your thunder here, but typically in the junior level, those teams you don't have years of teams running like that, right? So
yeah, I mean, I kind of equate it to like college football, right?
Yes.
College football, you'll have a 3 to 4 year, you'll have a 3 to 4 year gap, and then you'll have 1 or 2 down years, and it's very similar with how the OHL is structured.
Right. By the way, just popped up on my phone. Amadeus Lombardi has scored the first goal tonight for the Grand Rapids Griffins. This kid, he's making noise right now that you got to wonder if the Red Wings are noticing. You got to wonder if they're noticing with Amadeus Lombardi.
And trying to get a little bit of a punch down, and trying to get a little bit of a punch down on their bottom six. Could be someone to do that for sure. I mean, your little Rock Me Amadeus would be very
but Garrett, he needs to add a little bit of size, in my personal opinion, because I think he's like 5'8", like 185, I think. So he's got to bulk. He's going to have to bulk up and get to about 205. I don't know if he'll be able to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, he's going to have to have, and he has it. He's going to have the skill, and I don't mean to put him on a pedestal here, but he's going to have the skill of like Pavel Datsyuk if he's not going to have the size, right? That's the only way he's going to be able to make the league, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because, or I shouldn't say Pavel Datsyuk. I mean Slava Kozlov, those type of players, right? Gustav Nyquist. That's the kind of size he is right now. So Thomas Tatar is another one that kind of comes to my mind. But so I don't know if he has it. So but damn, right now, if you're watching Grand Rapids hockey, he's fun to watch. He's fun. Wallander's been great down there too for Grand Rapids. Obviously, Kosa's been really good. Geilander, now this is interesting. Geilander's a goaltender. Carter Geilander for Grand Rapids has kind of floated back and forth between Toledo and the ECHL. It's also the Red Wings affiliate, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. And he's also floated back and forth between Toledo and Grand Rapids. Now, Grand Rapids sent Geilander down to Toledo. He played yesterday against the Cyclones and had a 5-4 win. Struggled a bit, but to be expected. And now he's been called back up to Grand Rapids. And what I was thinking, Garrett, was maybe Ville Husso was ready to return, and then perhaps maybe he had a setback.
Right.
So I'm not sure what's going on with Husso. So bottom line is, tonight, Geilander is backing up Kosa in the game against the Cleveland Monsters, which is a 1-1 tie, by the way. Not to spoil it. In the first period. So, that being the case, and my dog's upset in the background, I apologize for that. He's probably chasing the cat, most likely. But anyway, moving on with the ECHL. Now, this is, if you haven't watched an ECHL game, maybe get a one-day pass of Flow Sports. Flow Sports should be our other sponsor at this point. I mean, as much as I put them out there. Get you just get a one-day pass. They usually have like a game of the night. Watch an ECHL game. You'll be amazed at how great the play is. It's physical. The teams in the ECHL, you don't have a lot of travel outside of your division. So, for example, I live down here in South Florida, as everyone knows. Our local team's the Florida Everblades, right? Now we have 3 teams in the state of Florida. You have the Orlando Solar Bears, the Jacksonville Icemen, right? And then you have the Atlanta Gladiators and the the Savannah Ghost Pirates. And there's one more team. No, there's 2 more teams. Greenville the Greenville team?
It's the Greenville Swamp Rabbits, and there's something else.
And then the South Carolina Stingrays. Those are the teams that are in that division. They typically don't play outside of that division for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally they'll kind of like this year, Florida does play Toledo later in the year down here in Florida, so I might want to check that one out. Like a couple weekends from now, Toledo plays Orlando at home, so they kind of have that because the travel with those teams is very difficult, right? So they're spirited games. You got a ton of games against one team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Highly recommend you watch those. They are a lot of fun to watch. The ECHL really does bring it, and it's one of those things where you're probably the guys you're going to see on the Toledo level at the Walleye may or may not make the Red Wings roster. It's probably so far off. They gotta.
Yeah.
It's not like the Red Wings are going to call somebody out from Toledo. It just doesn't work like that. They have to go through the Grand Rapids system and then get the call up. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. However, you do get to see a lot of good hockey. I mean, Jan Bednar is the goaltender, the starting goaltender right now for the Toledo Walleye. He's played phenomenal. He's probably sixth on the depth chart in terms of Red Wing goaltenders. Maybe
I would
seventh.
say, probably around that. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's been lights out for them. Played really, really. Stole a game in Idaho last weekend. And kept him in a game against Wheeling the other night. So he's played very, very good. And it's been interesting to see him play. And it's just fun watching these guys. It's absolutely amazing.
It is, though. It is. I mean, you and I have gone to a couple of games. I mean, when I've gone down there, we've gone to, 2 or 3, I think, when we've been down there. I mean, it's been fun. It's a little scrappier too. I mean, we've seen a couple little Donniebrooks happen, but I mean, it's been good.
So speaking of that division, the Jacksonville Icemen have a goaltender by the name of Matt Vernon. Now, the name Vernon, if to a lot of your Red Wing fans has shown, or it should ring a bell, obviously, right, from 1997 with the Stanley Cup win. His son, Matty Vernon, Mike Vernon with the Red Wings, Matt Vernon, his son, playing for the Jacksonville Icemen, is a goaltender. Color me surprised, right? Made an absolute, check it out if you can go to the at ECHL on X and search the name Matt Vernon. He makes an unbelievable glove save on a 2-on-0 breakaway from the Orlando Solar Bears. If you could check out that save, it's absolutely unbelievable. Typically a goaltender in that league doesn't fare very well on a breakaway. But in this case, it worked out well for Matt Vernon, and he was able to sprawl across, post to post, and make the glove save on the Solar Bear player that just couldn't lift the puck high enough. And then he skated back to the bench and was very upset, as to be expected. But that's the type of play you get from the ECHL, and I think that league is pretty good top to bottom. Toledo had a great weekend, by the way. Hosting Wheeling on Friday night, ended up winning that game 3-2. They had to hang on in that game, but Wheeling got up to a quick 2-0 lead, and that's just Toledo's first home game. I guess it was to be expected, but Jan Bednar, as I mentioned, just stood on his head in that game, and kept Wheeling off the board, and Toledo for the victory. And then last night, as I mentioned, Geilander had the job in net against the Cincinnati Cyclones in a game that was back and forth. Toledo went up 2-0. Cincinnati tied it. Then they went up. They were up 1-0. Cincinnati tied it. Then they went up 3-1. Cincinnati tied it. 4-3 tie, and then finally Toledo takes it 5-4. So some good showings by Toledo over the weekend. 2 huge wins. They are off until next week against the Fort Wayne Comets at home on the 8th and 9th. And then they travel to Kalamazoo against the K-Wings on the 10th. Going back to Grand Rapids real quick.
By the way, one of the worst buildings in all of sports just to watch any sporting event, the Fort Wayne Memorial Coliseum.
It's
humongous.
What an
absolute dump.
Not only that, Fort Wayne, so the Comets also play there, but so do the Horizon League team, Fort Wayne.
Yes.
They also play in the same arena.
Yes.
Identical same arena.
And they have 2/3 of the arena blocked
off. They have 2/3 of the arena blocked off during a basketball game, yeah. It's really bizarre. You're right. But
and it makes me feel like I'm back in like the 80s.
Yeah, like when the Spurs, remember when the Spurs used to play, the San Antonio Spurs used to play at the Alamo Dome? And they
Yes.
they used to put a curtain up in the upper deck until they made the NBA Finals. Then you could buy a $40 upper deck seat that you couldn't see anything in, but you could be there.
Right, but you could say you were there.
You have a ticket stub. Going back to Grand Rapids real quick, Garrett, I did want to mention this. Grand Rapids tonight's playing in Cleveland on Sunday, and then they are at Rockford on Friday, rematch.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're at Iowa on the 7th. So at Iowa, then at Rockford, and then they're off until the 13th against Rockford, coming up for them. So that's what you have in the minor leagues right now. Last thing I wanted to talk about, a couple things we want to talk about here. College hockey over the weekend. The Michigan Wolverines, number 10 or 11 in the country, depending on which poll you want to watch, traveled out to Boston to take on the Terriers. TC beat it a little bit there on Friday night with a 5-1 win over the fighting Ryan Whitneys. And then last night, Garrett, take a 5-4 win into overtime against Boston and sweep that weekend series. That could be a weekend where this Michigan team maybe starts to take a step forward a bit. And historically, Michigan's been kind of one of those smaller, kind of puck possession, speedier kind of teams. This is a Michigan's team that I think you also have Draper's son and LaPointe's son on that team, and they're on the same line.
Right.
And kind of playing like Keegan Draper is kind of one of those players, Garrett, I think is maybe starting to get this Wolverine team to be more of a physical, maybe bigger team than we've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. And if you look at a lot of the national championship teams that have won in the last few years, some of the attributes of those teams are typically that they're typically teams that are a little more senior laden, right? They have a little more senior experience and they have that snarl to them. That helps them.
Absolutely, and I think this is the Michigan team that is that way. And to me, if you look at the analytics from the series. Michigan had 7 out-of-man rushes and BU had 8 shots in the slot, 19 and 19. The takeaways, Michigan had 80, BU had 78. That's a really pretty much an even series when you really take a look at it. But Michigan outscored them 10-5. That's, I think, the difference.
This is a good team, by the way. I'm taking a look right now at their
BU's
roster.
5. They're 5th in the country.
Well, they also have Michael Hagee, who was a first-round draft pick this past year. I want to say for Vegas, drafted him first round this last year. I think he might be a Vegas property, if I'm not mistaken. And he's going to be a solid player, I think.
And then you have Hallam for Michigan, had a hat trick in that game last night, and it scored the game winner to top it off.
And that's no slouch on that BU team.
No, sir.
That's a team. That's a team that always fights year in year out with BC. BC's got a little bit more of the better players, if you will. They've got the number one,
at least recently.
What's turning out to be the number one consensus prospect in this year's draft, which is James Higgins. He plays on BC. But again, it's also still a little too early to do anything because again, we haven't gotten into the meat of the junior schedule yet.
No, we have not, and that's going to be the thing, right? And we'll see where Michigan goes from here because historically, Michigan's usually horrible until we get to January. This year, they're kind of starting out, I think, more consistent. And it's a team, too. You got to remember, it was a younger team last year that made it to the Frozen Four and caught a lot of people off guard. Now, of course, they ran into Boston College like everybody else did last year, except for Denver. And, excuse me, that was they just weren't going to go any further than that. They beat Michigan State. They beat Air Force. Or not Air Force, I'm sorry, Colgate. Which, by the way, Carter Geilander was the goaltender for Colgate when they played Michigan. Fun fact.
Oh, yeah.
Fun fact.
Full circle.
Full circle, right? So there you go. So it's interesting. And then you get to see, like I said, you have Draper, who's a Red Wing prospect. And then you have LaPointe. I don't remember if Marty LaPointe's son's a prospect for the Red Wings or not. I don't think he is. I think he's with Boston.
I don't believe he is. I don't believe he is. I know LaPointe, I believe, still works in the Montreal front office. I believe he's the director of their amateur scouting, I want to say.
There you go. So he's probably with Montreal, most likely. But still.
Or, I mean, he could have been undrafted, but it's possible they do also offer him a contract to go back and do the prospect tournament type things.
You would think.
I mean, because I'm sure, and I would have to do some research. I'm like 95% positive his dad in former Red Wing Martin Lapointe is in the front office for the Canadien.
Yeah, and you got to think if that's the case, Lapointe's probably going to play with Laval pretty soon, I would think, in the A. I would assume. I got to think.
By the way, he's the director of player personnel and amateur scouting for the Canadien.
There you go. So, very, very interesting. How about that, huh? So, college hockey sweep this weekend for Michigan. That's great. By the way, the women's team with our friend Jenna Tribbiano, the head coach, a 3-1 win over the weekend. So that's great for the women. Way to go, Jenna. Awesome job. Beat Michigan State a couple weeks ago. That's phenomenal. Anytime you can beat anybody from East Landfill, that's fantastic. So,
of course,
way to go. Go blue on that one. And, yeah, all you Sparty haters that aren't going to like me for that, don't care.
East trashing.
East trash. So, yeah. Absolutely. I did not, by the way. Let's take a look here, Garrett, by the way, since I have it on here. Let's take a look at Michigan State because I'm curious. I'm looking it up right now. How did our buddy
Ray Augustine do? Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Let's see. Let's take a sneak peek.
We were going to tell the fine people that last episode. We just didn't get around to doing it.
Yes. So I cannot remember though if Stady had a game this weekend or not. I think. Let me see here. They were playing at Canisius. I think they were off this weekend. I do not believe they played this weekend. I think they had an off weekend.
Which would make sense because I believe they were there. They also, I believe they would have their home games in 2 weeks, just like the Michigan Wolverines would as well.
Yes, and it looks like here, according to their X page, they did not. So, yeah. So Michigan State was apparently off this weekend. So, and they did sweep Canisius 2 weeks ago, by the way. And they will also play in the Great Lakes Invitational. Which, by the way, if you want to go to that, if you're local in Michigan, that is no longer in Detroit. This year, it's going to be at the Van Andel Arena in GR.
Yeah, and I actually like that. I actually like that it's going to be better. You know, I like that a little bit about that tournament. I do like that it's going to be in Grand Rapids, and I think it'll be a little bit better ran at that point.
Absolutely, no doubt. Yeah. So Michigan State hockey was off this weekend. So that gives our pal there in net a week off. So that's not too bad. And by the way, nothing against Michigan State. I'm just picking, but Adam Nightingale, the head coach of Michigan State, has completely turned that program around. That was a bad state for a long time. And what he's done to come in there and not only just get guys to go there, but he got talent to go there, and they've rode the ship there. So it's completely turned that entire organization around. So good for that, and good for them, and good for Adam Nightingale. In my opinion, it's better for Michigan when Michigan State's good. When that was bad, it just really wasn't. The hockey wasn't that great between the two squads. So
no,
you know. So yeah, so that's our college update there with Michigan. By the way, going into our prospects talk, Garrett, here as we wrap up the show, I did talk about Amadeus Lombardi scoring a goal tonight and getting a great play by Soderblom here against Cleveland. That tied the game at 1, but now Cleveland has taken a 2-1 lead at home against GR. Also, one of the Red Wing prospects is playing tonight. Let me see. Who is this in here? Becker is also, I think that's how you say his name. Becker is a third rounder for the Red Wings this past year, is making his debut tonight with Grand Rapids. Kosa is in net, as I mentioned. Still no Wallander tonight either. Oh, well. So here's what you have tonight for Grand Rapids. Mazer, Gettinger, Wallander, Lagesson, Jonas, and Husso are all out due to injury for Grand Rapids. So from a prospect standpoint, that's tough. But Yeah, interesting. And just kind of looking down through the sheet here. This past weekend, Garrett, speaking of the Swedish Elite League that we were talking about, or the SHL earlier we were talking about, our friend ASP there for Slefka. An absolute great goal that tied the game at 3 yesterday afternoon. Skated in between the circles, then skated up to the net and just flipped one over the goalie's shoulder into the top corner. This kid, Garrett, if he doesn't make the outright roster next year, which it seems that's going to be the plan unless he has a really bad camp, he's at least going to be a stud for Grand Rapids next year. His game, his puck-moving style is already dominant in the SHL right now. I got to think moving forward, there's some rumor that perhaps after the SHL season ends that he could end up in Grand Rapids for their playoff push. We'll see. I don't know. But
it's always tough to determine.
Right.
It is. I mean, it's tough to determine that without a doubt. I mean, I think, to be fair though, I mean, that is a move that, not that I think that it matters any or that it would matter much at all, but I mean that there is some truth that, hey, you move Mata out and then you would hypothetically think that at least that's a body that wouldn't come back next year, obviously, that gives you some flexibility. So, I mean, they might give him every chance for sure. I mean, obviously it's way too, I don't even want to start thinking about next year while the Wings are, playing at least in where we're at, but it is something to note. And also something to note, though, and we had talked about this pre-show, touching base, coming back down the stretch here, we're rounding third, heading into the last few minutes of the show. I did just want to tell some people as well, too. We've kind of, touched base on a little bit of everything. Prospects and how things are going for top prospects and players who have been drafted by organizations. And I'm just going to use the North American League, the CHL. I'm going to use, the OHL, the Q, and then the Western League. In looking a little bit at the top goal scorers so far for those teams, they're about 14, 15 games in. The number 1 and number 2 ranked players in the OHL are also going to be the top, 2 of the top 5 ranked players as well, too, heading into this upcoming June's draft. Michael Misa, who plays in Saginaw, he was an exceptional status player who had joined their team at 15, and he was a big part of what carried them to the Memorial Cup win last year in Saginaw that they hosted. He's at 28 points in 15 games,
That's
and
incredible.
They've got Porter.
That's absolutely incredible.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it is incredible when you think about it, but he's also kind of matured a lot over the years too, and I think that he was rated the number 1 prospect this year too, and he'd been rated the number 1 prospect when he was 15. And I think learning that he didn't need to do everything, I think it was good for him to kind of take a few steps back and not be the guy coming out of this draft. I think he's done a real nice job though, moving forward. And then Liam Greentree, he's a first-round draft pick this past year from the Kings. He's at 28 points in 14 games, and then sitting atop the leaderboard for the OHL points lead so far is Porter Martoni. He's a right-handed shooting right winger, and he plays for Brampton. He has 32 points in 14 games, and he's projected to be a top 5 pick on this year's draft. So he's going to be a guy to watch out for. A guy in a couple years that you might want to watch out for is going to be Gavin McKenna. So we just got done talking about exceptional status players. Well, the WHL has another exceptional status player because, God forbid, they get all the effing exceptional status players. Oh, they get this guy. Oh, they get this guy. Oh, you got Connor Bedard? Okay, great. No, Gavin McKenna is, listen to this, folks. He's only 16 years old, okay? He's only 16 years old. And this is a league this year that doesn't have a whole lot of top heaviness to it with regards to, it's a younger league. There aren't as many NHL status players yet in terms of, I'm looking at the Elite Prospects board, and it tells you the logo, Don, on the side of who owns their rights.
Oh, okay.
There just aren't as many of them on there that are in the W. The kid's 16 years old and has put up 29 points in 16 games.
And he's 16 years old. As a 16-year-old. Now, remember, I know in the W it's hard to get excited about that, but remember, He's 16 years old playing against guys that are up to 20 years old in that league. That's saying something because he's going to be able to take that and move it into the next level. So he's already ahead of his class.
And typically the OHL and the Western League are typically two of the more balanced leagues.
They sure are.
Maybe the OHL is a little bit more goal scoring, and then I'd say maybe you get a little more of the two-way play fuel in the Western League. The Q is more of just the fun time circus parade, hand out everyone candy. You get a car league.
Yeah, it is. So the Q to me, if you've never watched it on CEHL TV, right? The Q is funny because, and I'll use Alex Lafreniere as a key example to this.
What?
Lafreniere, I forget what team he played for the Q. It
was not. It might have been Rimouski. It might have been the same team that I think Crosby was with.
That it was. And so he... So, to add to that, Garrett, what's funny about that is you remember the hype, if you will, that Lafreniere had, right? And then he comes into the NHL, he's drafted, and everyone's like, well, where's the hell's all this hype? That's what the Q is. The Q is this... It's this French hype train that typically is overhyped. Now, Crosby is going to be the exception. I will say that. And there's a few players that come out of there that are the exception. But in this case, it's not. And the Q is just that league that, in my opinion, overhypes what they have because that's all they see. That's all they watch. You don't really, for the most part, you don't have, other than the Montreal Canadiens, right? They don't have anything up there to watch. So they overhype that league because they literally, that's all they watch is the Q. They would, if you asked somebody that lives in that area, you would think the Quebec Major Junior League was the SHL. Seriously. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
And I get it. It's a nationalism thing. I understand that. But the Q is just that way. And if you know that going into it, it helps you understand it.
To be fair, when I was a young man, when I was like late teens, early 20s, that was the league to be a part of. I mean, it also had Nathan McKinnon. I think Nico Hischier was part of that league. And
absolutely.
Played for Halifax at one point, too.
That's
so,
right.
I mean, obviously, that was one thing where, that made sense at that point. But I think the Q, it's different out there. There is no NHL teams other than Montreal. A lot of those, teams will follow maybe Boston, maybe some of the New York teams. Like, there really isn't.
But it's the Maritimes,
much
too.
Loyalty to the actual big league.
Yeah, the Maritimes, too. That's their teams. Like you said, I mentioned Halifax. And that's their teams. Those are the only ones they watch. That's all they have. Okay. And so,
Yeah, and I was right, by the way. I was trying to think. I'm like, he did play for the Mooseheads. Yeah, I know he did play for the Mooseheads before he came over here. So, but go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, but that's just what they get to watch. I mean, that's who they watch. That's their local teams. Is it very nationalistic? Yes, it is. There's nothing wrong with that. I have no problem with that. But it's just every time a player comes out of that league, to me it seems like it's overhyped. And I learned that lesson with Lafreniere because I thought, and now Lafreniere's turned into that kid that is probably going to be a top player, but it took him 4 or 5 years of professional hockey to get there. So, right. But yeah.
Right,
so.
And even then, a guy like Nico Hischier took, I mean, he had a good first couple of years there, and now he's finally taking that step to being an elite number 100%. One, at least counterpart with Jack Hughes, which is stupid that they have both of them down the middle. But, that's for a different discussion.
Absolutely. And by the way, Michael Bronzen-Neidgard had a really good weekend this week for Schlefka. Overseas, and so did ASP, as we mentioned earlier. So, from our prospects over there in Sweden.
So,
what else you got for us, Garrett?
Nothing else. Just aside from that, it looks like we're pretty much set to go. On that front, Bashelnikov still looks pretty good. I guess tying it back to where the Wings are at now, with some of those prospects you had mentioned. Looks like Kiskinen, Kiskinen was a guy that they traded for last season.
Yes.
He's playing still strong in Liga, which is the Finnish league. a guy who's come out of nowhere, though, right now. Well, not out of nowhere. You'd mentioned Amadeus Lombardi. Emmett Finney, he was a 7th-round draft pick.
Yes.
Eisman had a couple years ago. He's at 19 points in 12 games with Kamloops right now. He looks like he's going to be potentially, at least you would give him a chance to play either for Grand Rapids or Toledo. He might be a guy that could maybe crack this roster in a couple of years. He really, I mean, I've seen him skate. He definitely could be a bottom 6 player.
Finney, as you mentioned in Kamloops is also in the WHL. And that's a tough league. I'll say that's a very, very tough league. It's very competitive there.
Yes.
And as you mentioned earlier, it's more defensive and offensive minded from both ends of it. If I was really to take a league in the junior level that is more balanced top to bottom, it's the WHL. And when a player like that, Finney, and to your point, who's kind of developed over the last couple of years, I think if you could watch a Kamloops game and maybe watch him play for the Blazers, you might be impressed with what you see. Because to your point, he has a chance to make the roster maybe in a couple years. But to your point, I think he would be a great piece in Grand Rapids or possibly even Toledo next year. So very, very interested to see if he.
Yeah, this is going to be his last. I believe this is going to be his last.
Because I think he's 20. Yeah, I think he's 20.
Yeah, I think he's 20. So he should be playing for one of those teams, and I think it'll be interesting to see how he would fit in, if he does even at all, when it comes to him moving forward within the Wings organization.
Absolutely.
But that's all I got for you, Don.
Excellent. Okay, well, with that being said, we'll wrap it up here, and we'll be back on next week. Thank you all for joining us again this week for episode number 8. As Garrett mentioned, we're going to try to get some more folks on here to do some interviews with, and maybe Matt Pocket might join us. We'll see. I'll see if I can get a hold of him, see what his availability might be. But next week,
you know what? You've got the plug for him. It would be awesome to have him on. He is a wealth of hockey knowledge. You think we're both hockey, savants? Boy, this guy takes it to another level.
And Pocket's a good dude. He's worked with him at WXOU when I was there, so he's a good kid, and he's a lot of fun, and he has a lot of passion. I'll say that. So tune in next week. We'll get you a little bit more update on the Red Wings. By the way, at Chicago Wednesday, at Toronto Friday, home for the Rangers on Saturday for the Red Wings this week. So we'll get you updated on that next week. So for Garrett Coloche, Don Tottingham, Raising the Banner, episode 8, we are out. We'll see you next week.